What does it mean to be Final Fantasy VII? Its identity is open to interpretation. Lacking detailed facial features or voice acting, tone wasn't easy to discern. One would simply have to assume character actions and motivations based on the perception they had of a group of people who often didn't even know themselves. Its materia system meant that outside of their limit breaks, characters didn't have a mechanical fixture to latch onto. You could give all of your magic materia to Barret, you could stick your only healing materia onto Cloud, you could decide whether Aerith had the purity of a white mage, the chaos of a black mage, or maybe a mix of both. You had free reign over which party members you'd use at any given time, and they'd each have unique things to say about whatever was happening. In a way, players got to choose what their Final Fantasy VII was, leading to an infinite number of different readings. I put the cover materia on Cloud, which meant he'd often take hits for other party members. It made him feel like a knight, buckling under the weight of trying to protect his newfound family, and that made his failure at the Forgotten Capital even more pronounced. How do you remake an experience like that? In an age where you can glean intent off a pair of squinted eyes or softly worded remark, which path is more correct? The one intended by the creators dozens of years ago, or the myriad interpretations everyone now holds sacred? Well, I think Midgar is oppressive. The Shinra building is like a king's castle, towering over everyone, an eternal reminder of who runs the world. A physical caste system has been built where the higher up you live, the more social standing you have. Those who can afford to live on top of colossal plates that hang over the lower class slums, blotting out the sky. These settlements exist within giant landfills, scraped together using discarded construction materials where deadly monsters roam free. These communities are forced to create neighborhood watches that prevent these monsters from moving into populated areas, as Shinra refuses to do anything about it. We get to walk along the artificial sun lamps which provide light to the slums, a physical reminder that Shinra holds all the cards. If they wanted to, they could blanket the slums in eternal darkness. They hold the sun in the palms of their hands, and they can drop the sky, should they so choose. Shinra is positioned, then, as a godlike entity. It is impossible to escape their influence.